Did you know that Wonder Woman was originally a kinky little freak? There is documented evidence time and time again of just so many examples of early Wonder Woman with so much like bondage and spanking and role play and kink. Like, it is not subtle. And maybe you already knew that, but did you also know that there's a kinky polyamorous triad behind the scenes that inspired it all? And there's a movie about it. But first, hi, I'm Genevieve. I'm polyamorous and non-monogamous for 12 years. I do long-form videos and resources here, short-form videos and resources here. I have a new podcast called I Could Never with real non-monogamous stories from around the world. I also have a second YouTube channel, Chill Polyamory 2, TOO, where I put, more serious and longer form polyamorous education. But on this channel, we have fun. I take a look at non-monogamy in film and TV. What do they do well? What is messy and they get wrong? In my opinion, let's get into it. I'm channeling my inner flapper kinkster today. Tell me this doesn't give like vintage flapper Wonder Woman superhero. I wanted to get in the mood. I wanted to be on theme. Professor Marston and the Wonder Women is based on the true love story of the real William and Elizabeth Marston who fell in love with Olive Byrne and how these women inspired the superhero. William is a psychology professor with Elizabeth as his research partner. She's unfortunately not allowed to get a PhD because she is a woman and it's the 1920s. And as a research pair, one of their life's projects is inventing the lie detector machine, which they do, in no small part with help from their student, Olive Byrne. They open up a research assistant position, Olive applies, and primarily because he's attracted to her, they accept Olive as their assistant. William is very into her, tells Elizabeth about that. I enjoy the transparency. And Elizabeth immediately is kind of pro non-monogamy.
You don't be jealous?
No, I don't experience sexual jealousy.
However, the two were also in authority position over her as a student in their class, and they were like eyeing her, sizing her up without her knowledge. I didn't love that. I'll get into that in a moment. And immediately, Elizabeth, who had been trying to be cool girl, I'm not jealous about anything, turns around and does this.
Do you have any questions? I have many, but I'm sure I'll manage.
Oh, and if you fuck my husband, I'll kill you.
Excuse me?
And then tells her to fetch them coffee. As far as we know, Olive has just applied to study and learn. And now this couple has already put her in the middle of their marriage, and she hasn't done anything yet. They convince Olive to let them study this like sorority hazing practice that involves spanking, and they're clearly both aroused by it, and Olive is it's ambiguous, like, is she aroused that they're watching or is she feeling exploited? That part is still a little unclear, but to their credit, they talk about it, like, how are you feeling? How did that affect you? And so William is starting to fall in love with Olive. Olive is starting to fall in love with Elizabeth. Elizabeth is not ready to admit that she's also in love with the two of them. There's a little bit of a push-pull, but eventually all three express their attraction to each other. They start having sex with each other. However, they are still fucking their student, which is a no. And the two Marstons get fired. And Elizabeth, leading the charge, is saying, like, this has to be over, right? Like, there are too many consequences, but Olive is pregnant. And it's like, oh no, what are we gonna do? A time jump is what we're gonna do. And then we get a 2-minute montage of like drip, 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 fast forwarding. And I get it, it's a true-ish story. Probably a lot of parts of it that don't like fit into a neat little package for a film. I get it, you gotta fast forward, but it felt like a weird time to just skip over what they do about it. Anyway, fast forward, the family now has 4 children. They all live together, the 3 of them in one home. The story for the neighbors is that Olive is a widow and that the Marstons have taken her and her kids in as like a generous thing to do. William wanders into a lingerie store and costume shop where in the back room they've got some kinky shit going on, And so that is where he is first brought into the world of BDSM. And William is very inspired, let's say. And they establish that real photos of kink in practice, that is considered pornography, and that in at least for the times, could be illegal even. So he starts drawing smutty pictures, basically being drawn to this idea of like, what if it wasn't pornography, if it was like a comic book? Like, what if it was seen as like a way to explore power and authority by creating a superhero? And as a framing device throughout the entire movie, we see William defending Wonder Woman to like this board of educators or like a Save the Children type of organization, like some sort of religious, right-wing authority who's trying to tell him you shouldn't make Wonder Woman or whatever.
But not everybody is as enthusiastic about the new comic book craze.
In every issue of Wonder Woman, whipped, spanked, chained, bound, gagged.
We gotta cut the kinky shit by
50 to 60%.
50 to 60%. We gotta cut the kink.
Like they're trying to walk this line of like, how do we deal with this subject matter without being censored, And we see William like keep coughing.
Are you all right, Dr. Marston?
And the thing about a cough in a movie is it never means anything and you don't have to worry about it. So everything is going great until the neighbor, for some reason, walks into their door, walks in throughout their entire home, and then walks into their bedroom. It's a little contrived, right? Like, would a neighbor actually do that? I don't know. Suburbia in the 20s, maybe they're that nosy. But now the neighbor sees them in this kinky threesome, and the secret is out. Now Elizabeth gets scared and reactive and tells Olive, you gotta go. And this is not the first time Elizabeth has pushed her away out of fear, but it is the worst time she has done it, and Olive has to start over as a single mom now, like, girl. But anyway, obviously they miss each other. Obviously, especially Elizabeth really misses Olive, and she will not admit it to herself.
Do you love her?
And he encourages them to get back together. So it's at this point that I want to dig into a couple of the different themes that we see in this film and how realistic or not, or cool or not, I think their portrayal of polyamory specifically was.
Are you normal? What is normal?
So what is normal, right? We get asked that in the first few minutes of the film, and I think that's a good question. I think that's an important question, especially when what's called abnormal gets burned. In the 1920s in the US, powerful women, especially in comic book spaces, were not normal.
Lady superhero? No ordinary lady superhero. The modern day Athena.
Superhero comics with female leads, they flop.
Well, she will be different.
It's like superheroes who are women are always flop. It's like, yeah, because you haven't made one yet that is actually a badass, that is actually powerful, that is actually someone you want to root for, And that's what he found in Wonder Woman, inspired by these two women in his life, was strength and softness, was moral goodness, trying to be nonviolent, but also catching the bad guys, and having a personality, And so all of that made Wonder Woman a hit. Again, it's something we've heard kind of recently about superhero films, that one starring women flop until Wonder Woman proved them wrong. So I do appreciate that they are pushing us to think about this and that they are establishing, especially that the characters believe, that human norms can change. So in addition to norms being relative, what is radical is also relative.
The cocksuckers denied me again. I'm smarter, more rigorous, more accomplished than any of the so-called men in this department.
We see Elizabeth very angry at institutions being dismissive of women as a default. But then...
So what you're saying is, you are descended from two of the most famous radical feminists in the world, and yet you were raised by nuns. I thought you were just...
What?
I don't know. Not that.
Shocked that this woman has thoughts in her head and is related to other radical feminists and shit. She assumes, because Olive is young and beautiful, that she's just an airhead. And it's like, okay, tell me more how it sucks to just default dismiss a woman. And sometimes William does things like this too.
Olive, do you want a penis?
No,
What do you think that you have, penis envy?
I don't really understand what that means. I'm sorry.
It means a woman experiences an envy of the male position in the world. His dominance, his ability to penetrate not just the woman, but life.
Oh, penetrate life.
Yes.
This person positioned himself as such a feminist and so pro-women. If he actually did believe these kind of like bio-essentialist, like human nature is inherent to your sex kind of views. That would be like kind of inconsistent. Representing real people in general on screen is tricky, but especially when it's a period piece, because I believe that these people were actually very radical for their time. But trying to portray them today in the polyamorous community or kink community, in leftist or feminist spaces, they might be like side-eyed a little bit as being a bit regressive or not doing what they think they're doing, you know? And that extends to multiple times objectifying Olive.
I want to study her. Her beauty gives her an advantage over the other girls.
Meanwhile, the blonde girl next to her fancies the same boy. Oh, the blonde girl hates our girl with a passion. So fierce, she can barely sit there.
I was gonna call this unicorn hunting, but it feels so much more like primal and like predator prey, or like a National Geographic, you know, voiceover studying animals in the wild kind of vibe. It didn't feel like unicorn hunting. If that's a new term for you, it is a mocking term for a couple that is approaching an individual looking for a triad. You know, sometimes individuals like dating couples, but often we don't, and we might feel like prey or we might feel like objectified, you know, and we tease because couples don't always go about it the best. So we see these two hunters, you know, looking across the way. Like, I don't know if they could have found an actress that looked more like an actual baby deer. But to her credit, Olive is like, stop it, you know, I'm here too. I am a person, and I want to be like your equal.
I never do anything, and yet nobody sees me or hears me. It's just all noise and hostility and lies.
She's advocating for herself in a way that I'm like, yeah, tell him, Olive, you know?
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you.
So after it comes out that William is falling in love with Olive, and that Olive is falling in love with Elizabeth, Elizabeth casts everybody out, everybody leave.
Gather your things, I want you out of here immediately.
As jarring as this was, I did kind of appreciate it because it shows some texture to some people's real polyamorous experience or non-monogamous experience at the very least. It's like, intellectually, I want to be okay with this. Like, this is according to my values. And then they get in the moment and they have a visceral reaction, right? Like their nervous system has not caught up. Like the intellectual and emotional, they don't always talk to each other at first. And even though I have compassion, Elizabeth was still an asshole.
Well, we are in something, and I don't know what it is, but we are in it. And I feel that I have violated my raison d'etre as a psychologist by running from alarming emotions rather than confronting them. So here we are. Fuck you. I'm saying that I'm open to having sex with you, as is my husband.
Well, we are willing to have sex with you. Girl, what? Like, we're way past that. Like, yeah, you haven't had sex yet. Sure, that can be an element of this, but she just confessed her love to you. She's falling in love with you, right? This was not the conversation, you know? And Elizabeth could have very easily just been the villain and been very flat and two-dimensional, like the evil girlfriend versus the vulnerable new girlfriend, you know? And that I think would have been the easier way for a filmmaker to go about it if they didn't care. But the actress, Rebecca Hall, you know, she is vulnerable and soft, and you can tell she's scared, and her defenses are up and her guard's up and she's reactive. Like, you can see all of that going on underneath the surface. It's a very skilled performance that I think makes Elizabeth stay endearing despite her being an asshole. It's this complicated thing. It's like, I don't approve of what you're doing. I do understand why you're doing it. And also, girl, you gotta stop, you know? Like, but because this situation is deepening, we start to lose a bit of that like unicorn huntery predator prey vibe. And Olive starts to position herself as their equal, as their peer, to the best of her ability. There are still some power dynamics that don't work in her favor. Because these are very kinky characters, I think it creates this great opportunity to talk about actual power versus simulation of power. And by that I mean, in the real world, you might actually be able to throw your weight around and have power over people in a way that they can't do anything about. But with kink, yeah, somebody might have authority over you, but that is agreed upon together. And if you can stop it at any time or change the terms at any time if you don't like it, then have you really given up power, or is it a simulation of giving up power? So when it comes to actual power dynamics, with William and Elizabeth, they are two educators. They have power over Olive, especially him having power over her with her grade, with her academic advancement. Like, they had the power to give her access to this mentorship, which might make her go far, Not to mention that they are older, that they have more life experience, they have more resources available to them. Like, they carry power that I don't know that they navigate always so thoughtfully, at least not always with Olive's best interest in mind. As well, William has actual power over both of them. He's a man in the 1920s in the US, right? Like, he might spend his whole life and career trying to celebrate them and empower them, but there are structural things at play where this brilliant woman is not allowed to get a doctorate. She can only get a secretary's job without her husband. He, meanwhile, can just walk into a high-powered publisher's office and pitch a comic book and get it printed, right? Like, these things are very much present. And what can happen when someone feels disempowered in one area of life, that Elizabeth feels like she's in her husband's shadow, and she professionally very much is. But then Olive walks in and she's less powerful than Elizabeth. And so Elizabeth can throw her weight around and, make demands and order Olive to come or to go at her leisure, and I see that happen a lot, unfortunately, where people are like, well, I'm not in charge over here, so I'm gonna be in charge over there, and like repeating the cycle of keeping someone down. Elizabeth kicks Olive out a couple of times in the film. She just decides that she has that veto power, and William goes along with it. And now Olive, even when she is living with them, when she has children with them, right? When she is an equal third parent, Elizabeth is still in that mindset that, well, if this ever doesn't work, I kick you out. It's not a question of whether Elizabeth should leave or whether William should be the one to leave. Like, that's not even occurring to them. We operate as one unit, so obviously you're the one that has to go. That isn't great. And again, like, we can have flawed polyamorous characters on screen, It's something that she realizes in trying to exert control, that she's not just hurting Olive and William, but she's also hurting herself, and she's hurting her children by depriving them of their third parent, And so it is very frustrating. Kind of realistic because it happens, and also makes for a satisfying arc of Elizabeth finally trying to overcome that and start to welcome Olive in, not just as her peer, but as her partner. So those are actual power dynamics that are in the movie, but we're talking about kink, we're talking about play. What about the simulated power, and how does that play into all of this? It's actually really interesting because Elizabeth gets a bit confused about kink to begin with. She gets a bit confused seeing William binding Olive.
Olive, don't let him do this to you.
I don't mind.
Why the fuck don't you mind?
She gets very upset because she cares about Olive and she feels protective, and Olive kind of starts playing.
Is this what you really want? Then put your hands behind your back.
Elizabeth, who has always been a dom, she just didn't know it, Now that she knows it's not harmful, now that she knows she's not actually hurting Olive, she steps into that role, and this power exchange, this authority exchange, she is feeling really closer to Olive, and Olive is feeling like vulnerable and soft, and they're realizing in real time that submission is not a bad thing if you're submitting by choice to a loving authority, right? Like, so it's a really lovely kind of condensed scene to show what a lot of us realize about kink is that it can actually be really beautiful. When Olive is having this realization that she actually wants to be bound, and she's like putting on this outfit and like getting the gear and stuff, I do wish I saw more on her face, right? Like, maybe this is shitty, but I was like, oh, she's got real January Jones face on, meaning you're very beautiful and it's very flat, Like, this is a moment where you could be having so much going on internally of like realizing things, And this is the moment where we get the hero shot. We see the inspiration for Wonder Woman. But it's not just behind closed doors that they are simulating power.
Will you forgive me?
No.
Okay, that wasn't good enough. You need to submit to her.
Well, I don't know what you're talking about.
You cannot win every argument. You cannot dominate all the time.
You know, the dialogue's a bit on the nose, but for Elizabeth to be willing to get on her knees, to humble herself before Olive, to say, I'm dropping my tough exterior and I want to be soft and vulnerable with you, that I miss you and that I need you, that then winds up being healing.
Olive, please forgive me.
I think these moments with Elizabeth and Olive are probably my favorite in the film because it shows the growth of both women, of kind of correcting and slowly rebalancing over the course of the film to make themselves equals with each other. It's done in a really well-acted way that makes me so happy for them, that makes me rooting for them. This is such a sapphic film, a women-loving women film. Like, this is called Professor Marston and the Wonder Women, but I was thinking about it, I was like, he doesn't really have an arc, you know? He's kind of the same throughout, and if anything, he's often just playing a supporting role to the two women's love story. And we see this in how Olive falls for Elizabeth first and then invite William to join them. They are playing first and then invite William to join them, right? Like, it is very much about their connection and celebrating what they're discovering with each other and about themselves through each other. And throughout the film, they're showing us this imagery of like how he is inspired to make Wonder Woman because of them. So in a world that would have these women be just a secretary, just a stay-at-home mom, we see them told with so much depth and complexity and lifted up and elevated and celebrated as superheroes. And so, still coughing, obviously Marston is dying. Like, okay, lay it on a little thicker. And at this point in the film, the triad was still broken up. He realized he was dying, and the two loves of his life are not talking to each other. And he knows that they love each other. And he's like, I don't want to leave them both as single moms in this world where it's really hard for a woman to be able to support herself alone. I don't want that when they could have each other, when they could be happy and be raising kids together, right? Like, I usually don't love when a third partner tries to convince two other partners to get back together, but like, I do get it, like he was dying and he gets a pass for that. But the spirit of it was, you know, like, we are hurting ourselves more by trying to hide ourselves when we could actually live the life we want to live and actually chase happiness together. And that's exactly what happens. After Marston dies, the two women spend the rest of their days living together, raising their children, and we end the film looking at real photos of these three and their kids. It got me, I ain't gonna lie. That part was very effective, and I still have a very big fondness for it. What's true, what literally happened, is a bit up for debate. Like, this is very much a Hollywoodization of their story. The real William Marston's ties to the early progressive era suffrage, feminist, and birth control movements are well documented. He used iconography from the suffrage movement as symbolism in Wonder Woman in order to, in his words, signify her emancipation from men. So linking Wonder Woman to these movements is very direct and on purpose. When it comes to being told to cut the kinky shit, the publishers did tell him it was a real business memo to cut down the use of chains by 50 to 75%. When it comes to Marston's actual kinky life, his son thinks that when his dad talked about the importance of submission, he meant it only metaphorically. He went on to say that he never saw his parents do anything like that, though he was also their kid, so they could have hidden it from him. There's articles that say, you know, actually Elizabeth and Olive were not bisexual and they weren't actually in love. It was just like a V relationship. And I'm like, are these just like, you know, when a historian says these two women throughout history wrote love letters every day to their best friend, you know, they're just friends. And The Verge shared my suspicion, saying historians were reluctant to admit to the polyamorous relationship. They pointed out that the biographer, whose book was largely used by the film, was oddly coy about acknowledging Elizabeth and Olive's bisexuality, despite admitting that Elizabeth was a lifelong fan of Sappho's lesbian poetry. And the biography also implied that they couldn't have been in a romantic relationship because at one point William threatened to leave Elizabeth if she didn't accept Olive into their marriage. But any polyamorous person knows that you can absolutely love someone deeply and fear the relationship at the same time. Impressively, The Verge went on to quote Eve Sedgwick, a queer theory scholar, who said that because of stigma, queer people had to hide, and then historians used their lack of clear visibility as false proof that they didn't exist, saying heterosexuality is the assumed default, even when these two women were living together for 4 decades with evidence that they shared the same bed. It still somehow isn't enough to say for sure. Just grain of salt. All that to say is we weren't in their heads, we weren't in their beds, we don't actually know what the real people did. So all of this is about the film. In terms of the polyamory and how realistic or relatable the characters felt, I think they did a decent job. This is not how we all are, no. But like no one story could do that, I think. This is how some relationships can look, including the ugly parts, the messy parts, the parts where they hurt each other, right? It being a story about flawed people who love each other despite themselves, and they are figuring it out. I think ultimately it gets to a very loving and heartwarming place. And in general, it just is nice to have a polyamorous love story with a happy ending. I would love to know what you think, you know? Did you see it? Did you like it? Did you have different reactions? What did I miss? What did I get wrong? If you want to support this channel in a free way, you can hit like, you can comment something. It really helps with the algorithm. Share it, you know, hit subscribe. But also, if you want to support this project and all the other ones that I mentioned, that is pretty much entirely funded by patreon.com/chillpolyamory. So if you join me there, you get access to a 5-year catalog of polyamorous resources. I do monthly live chats where you can ask me anything about your situation. As well, I have a pen pals option where we can email each other. So there's a lot of different ways to talk and spend time together and chat about non-monogamy. So anyway, what films, what TV shows should I do next? Drop it in the comments below. Otherwise, I hope you have a great day and a great week, and I'll see you next time.